They're going without pay and they're struggling to, figure out how to put food on the table. And then you got these Congress people who we pay for, and they're off vacationing, enjoying their spring break. Do you think the regular American gets a spring break?
Welcome back to On the Record here on Queen City News Plus. I'm Chief Political Correspondent Andy Weber. Our first topic today, a conversation with a news organization that's pretty well known across the country, but brand new to covering D.C. That's, of course, TMZ, who has sent 3 of their reporters to cover the Capitol in only a way that TMZ can. Here's our conversation with those new reporters. First look, a few weeks back, TMZ had a few viral tweets calling out members of Congress and their vacations. What was the original interest there?
Well, we just thought that it's kind of messed up that there are so many people in our government, in the TSA, just in the DHS in general, that are going without pay. They're going without pay and they're struggling to, figure out how to put food on the table. And then you got these Congress people who we pay for, and they're off vacationing, enjoying their spring break. You think the regular American gets a spring break? I wish I got a spring break. And so spontaneously on air, Harvey said, send us your pics. If you see a congressperson out and about, loving their life on the taxpayer dime, send us your pics. And it grew into this huge phenomenon. Everyone sending in their pics. And so then one day Harvey comes to us and he says, fellas, I want you to move to DC. And here we are. And I feel like the whole vibe, the vibe is still the same. Like, people are still sending us their tips, their recommendations, their advice about how TMZ survives here and how we continue the good work we started with the whole Send Us Your Pics campaign.
So you mentioned Harvey's request for photos, him going to you for this new team in DC. How did it materialize? How'd you guys get there, and how'd you establish yourself somewhat quickly among the Capitol Press Corps?
Well, I think we're still establishing ourselves. I mean, it's been a wild first week. We got in a week from this past Sunday. So we're still getting our feet wet, but we've been doing nonstop interviews. We've been meeting with everyone you could possibly imagine on both sides of the aisle, and that ranges from staffers to Congress people and even more. So we're so excited to be here and kind of integrate ourselves in DC culture, and it's been really nothing but positive thus far.
DC people care about their jobs. They care about resumes. I'm sure someone has asked you, do you have experience covering politics?
The answer would be no.
Well, see, I disagree.
Yeah, you just heard it.
Speaking for myself, we've been covering politics steadily at TMZ for years now, and TMZ Live, one of our 2 national television shows, we routinely have some of the biggest politicians you could think of who come in and speak with Harvey and Charles. And as for myself, I've covered numerous campaign cycles. We of course, whenever there's a big cultural event, and that could be an election, it could be a war, anything in between. I mean, we're all over it. So just by being on Capitol Hill now, we are physically boots on the ground, and that's only going to enhance our coverage.
Yeah, you mentioned your experience in it, but I can see someone who may just know TMZ on the surface that may make the claim you guys aren't hard-nosed enough or serious enough to cover politics. What would you say to someone like that?
You know what? I think I'd say that's actually where our strength lies. I think, the way that people consume political media nowadays, it has evolved over the years. And I think, TMZ fills the perfect gap for coverage on Capitol Hill, just because of how we do cover things. The way that CNN or Fox would go about covering something is very different to the way that we would go about covering something. I think that's evident in the clips that we've released. We have no problem, going up to politicians on Capitol Hill and asking them the questions outright that the people want to know about. Charlie's done a great job of that, and Jacob has done a good job of that. I've done a good job of that. And the reception we've received since we've started is thank you, TMZ, for doing the work of the people, for bringing the truth to the people. So that's what I would say.
Which is crazy. That's just like, the overwhelmingly positive response has been just like almost shocking and just so gratifying because often, TMZ, a lot of people have their opinions about, right? And the opinions are always quite diverse, to say the least, and that's fine and that's cool. And that's always the way it's been. But to come here and be embraced by DC in general and just having lots of people online kind of like cheering us on, like, finally, finally, we've got an operation like this, which is going to hold some sort of truth to power that hasn't been before. Like, this is a new way of doing things. Media is evolving, and I feel like we're at the forefront. And we're here for good now. We're here for good, and we're going to try to make a footprint, kind of getting to know the real side of politics, the real side of the politicians, and also just the real side of this amazing city.
TMZ is known for breaking stories around celebrity news as well as in Hollywood. I'm curious, is your goal to eventually scoop other news organizations in DC?
Absolutely. Getting scoops is a huge reason why we're here. We're here to compete. And we want to cover politics in Capitol Hill, again, the same way that a lot of people are when it comes to covering big events. And again, too, we're going to give it our own personal touch as well. Like kind of the clips that we've been mentioning. Sometimes we can have fun and we can talk about pop culture and people's personal lives, pulling back the curtain on what it's like being a politician in DC, and at times asking them very serious questions. I think it really just comes down to our approach. We don't want to just be shooting out questions and waiting on responses. We want to sound kind of more like someone at a town hall or someone that you meet at a bar, and just kind of have these real talk, raw conversations. And I think that type of authenticity is what a lot of people are craving right now.
Is paying for big tips on the table?
Absolutely not,
Why not?
because that's not something that we do. That's just categorically false.
I gotcha. I gotcha. I'm curious, is the permanent posting or temporary? I see you're in a conference room right now. What's the plan long term?
It's permanent, man. It's permanent. We are officially DC locals as of about a week ago. So we're hoping it continues to go as well as it's been going because like I'm moving my family out here. There, we've left our house, we're getting rid of our leases and that sort of stuff. So we're hoping this ride continues and we think it will.
You mentioned the reception among viewers and followers. I'm curious, among members of Congress and federal secretaries, do they like you? Do they like you guys being there? What's been the reception there from members of Congress?
They actually
It's
do.
great. It's actually, and I think that's one of the things that surprised us the most. I think being the new guy on the block, you come into it thinking, what if they don't accept me? What if they don't want to work with me? But I would say, like, a lot of Congress, a lot of the Senate, a lot of politicians and people that work on Capitol Hill are like, can we get an interview with you guys? Can we grab a coffee? Not even just the congressmen, but all of their teams as well. It's like the reception has been really, really good, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so we're happy to be here. DC's welcomed us with open arms, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at LAX for almost 13 years trying to get celebrity interviews, doing the same thing on LAX as I'm doing on Capitol Hill. And the strike rate of like people agreeing to an interview and people like giving a good interview is so much higher in Capitol Hill. All of these people, they want the platform. They want to show people who they really are. They want to talk about issues that really affect them. And we're giving them that platform. And we're not trying to gotcha anyone. We're not asking crazy questions. We're just trying to be like conversational and ask questions that are on our mind in the moment. There's no special sauce. So I've been really pleased with how many Congress people are like, let's do it. Let's do something TMZ. It really opens my mind to the possibility here.
And we're used to sort of that kind of rush up, in the moment TMZ interview. I saw some clips though of some longer form stuff you guys been doing, kind of a sit down interview. I think it was about Epstein files, stuff like that. Is that also in the works? Longer form interviews?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want to speak too much on it, but we have some, I would say, pretty high ranking people in Congress that are have reached out, and we have these long form interviews scheduled, and they are going to be talking about things that I don't think have been spoken of on any other outlet before. So our long form interviews are definitely something we're looking forward to pushing out more in the near future.
Welcome back to On the Record here on Queen City News Plus. Our next topic is the fact that Virginia has recently redrawn their congressional maps. They follow several states who have done it, like Texas, North Carolina, and California. Virginia, controlled by Democrats in their state house, redrew it to give Democrats a 10-1 control of the seats in Congress if midterms go their way in November. So we spoke with Dr. Michael Bitzer over at Catawba College about what this means for the country as a whole when it comes to the control of Congress. Here's our interview. So let's first start with this recent change now, I guess, in Virginia. Where did this come from, and what do you make of it?
Well, this really came out of the Texas redistricting effort in order to pick up Republican seats at the behest of President Trump. That really had a domino effect. It impacted North Carolina, impacted California. Most recently, it impacted Virginia on Tuesday. And this was really the Democrats' response to Texas picking up basically about 5 congressional seats. Now, Virginia is going to be picking up seats as well. And so, in the grand scheme of things, if you just look at the fundamentals in terms of what has been redrawn across the country, it looks like a wash, but we could have Florida also insert itself into a redistricting dynamic. So, we'll have to kind of wait and see how this all pans out.
I'm curious, too, whenever you see a new map being drawn, there's always a question of a legal challenge. Is that on the table with Virginia and other maps we've seen, or is Virginia just the one that seems to be still up in the air?
Apparently, there is a legal challenge to the Virginia referendum that was held on Tuesday. So we'll have to see how the courts in Virginia deal with it. It's likely that it will not go into federal court because the U.S. Supreme Court in the Rucho v. Common Cause case out of North Carolina said redistricting is not a federal court issue. That belongs to the states. So however the Virginia courts rule on whether this referendum was constitutional, legal, that will be the deciding factor.
I'm curious, too, we've seen in every state that has redrawn the maps, they've had to dilute districts. So for Texas, it may have been a red district, or for Virginia, it may have been a blue state or blue district that becomes a little less blue or a little less red. Does that spell trouble for those majority parties in those states come the midterms?
I think this is a critical question that not a lot of people have been thinking about but will be ultimately the determiner. What will be the political dynamics in 5 months, 6 months to the November general election that we have no idea right now where things will be headed? We believe it will be a good Democratic year. If you look at things like the generic ballot, Democrats are up typically about +5. These districts don't necessarily take that into account. They rely on past election results. And if some districts have been diluted in terms of, let's say, Republican strength, if it shifts more towards Democrats, that then opens up all these other districts that by normal dynamics would be Republican districts. But if the environment is shifting to the Democrats, and if there's some kind of wave going on, that potentially puts even more districts into play.
Yeah, it seemed like the initial effort by the White House was to counter a possible midterm down season. But there's a real risk of a backfire, fair to say?
Very fair to say. I think what they were trying to do was to buy an insurance policy against a Democratic wave election. And even in today's hyper-partisan, very calcified, rigid voting patterns, that doesn't always play to the Republicans' advantage. So we'll have to wait and see how things progress through the summer. If the president's approval rating continues to take a hit, if people are still concerned about the economy, those two factors oftentimes join together and become the primary determiners of what happens in a midterm. The Republicans want to try and blunt any potential impact, but that is extremely hard to do if the public has soured on the Republican Party.
In the eastern part of the state here in North Carolina, we did see two districts redrawn to give Republicans an advantage come the midterms. Things seem to have changed a lot in recent months and recent weeks. That being said, I mean, could we see is there a possibility that both would go blue or stay the same? What's on the table, you think, for the midterms here in North Carolina?
Well, I think for North Carolina, certainly all eyes are on the first congressional district. That was a highly competitive, one of the only competitive congressional districts in the entire South was the North Carolina first congressional district in 2024. That went slightly Democratic, so Don Davis won that district. He is going to compete again in the newly drawn first congressional district. And again, if the dynamics of a Democratic advantage on the generic ballot kind of hold true, that could continue to keep that first congressional district that now is about an R+4, R+5 district. That could make it again highly competitive. The third congressional district, where they basically swapped out precincts, is a little less Republican, but I think that the basics, the fundamentals of that district will keep it Republican. One eye to really watch on is clear across the state in the western part of the state, the 11th congressional district. That one is also an R+5. But again, if the dynamics of a Democratic wave are really kind of lapping up against some of these Republican districts, I think that's going to be one to watch.
And flipping an R+5 for lay people, I mean, how hard is that? Because I mean, it does seem that seat has been reliably safe. There are some big cities. Asheville comes to mind in that district. But how
Right.
big would it be to change that over to Democratic control?
It would take a lot in terms of how we look at these as political analysts. An R+5, Republican +5 means it was 5 points more Republican than either the state or national dynamics. And when you get to that level, that is typically, it's in a swing possibility, but it takes a momentum of push on the other side to really compensate for those 5 additional points. People tend to be locked into their voting patterns. If you vote Republican or Democratic from one election, you're probably going to be doing the same thing. North Carolina has a small percentage of swing voters, but if a lot of people on the Democratic side are energized, if independents move against the Republicans, and if Republicans look at this election and say, you know what, we're going to lose, I'm not going to show up, those kinds of dynamics, the fundamentals of an election, really could play into some interesting dynamics.
And what was different this time, obviously, was it was a mid-decade redistricting effort. Can we see a near future where it's every 2 years or even smaller intervals? Because it seems to be a pretty, I don't want to say popular, but now common political strategy to give an advantage to either party.
Well, North Carolina has about a 40-year history of never having one map of either the congressional or the state legislative maps hold for an entire decade. So we're used to these kind of mid-decade redistricting efforts. Oftentimes it was because a court told us to redraw the maps. But this is a new kind of political warfare going on. And at some point, when we get to 2030 and 2031, when we will have the census and then the formal redistricting process, it's probably going to end up being all of the states are, depending on who controls the legislature, the political party, they're going to maximize for the most gerrymandering in terms of partisanship. But we could see this as kind of a new opening in American politics.
And lastly, if Democrats do secure this blue wave come the midterms and do have control of the House, what does that mean for the president in his final 2 years in the White House, you say?
Well, I think it'll be intensity of gridlock on steroids. The Democrats will do massive amounts of investigations into the administration. The Trump White House and his administration will fight those. The other big question really is who controls the U.S. Senate. I think right now it's probably still an even split, but if the momentum continues to shift and if Democrats can win in some pretty reliable Republican states, that dynamic also has a factor to play into all of this. Let's just say from 2027 to 2028, it's going to be all off the chart in terms of polarization, and we will have a presidential contest well underway.
Is it possible to forecast a presidential contest based off a midterm, or is it just a different landscape these days?
It's a completely different landscape. If you try to use what's going to happen this November to predict in 2 years, let's go to a bar and have a drink, because I don't think that that's going to be a realistic dynamic. But it's going to show the intensity of what we have going on in American politics, and particularly here in North Carolina.
Thanks again to the guys over at TMZ, as well as Dr. Michael Bitzer with Catawba College. That's all for us here on The Record. We'll see you next time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.